So it looks like we're getting a new X-Men retro card Apocalypse from Marvel Legends, but is this action figure any good, and is he worth your money? Be sure you stick around until the end, soulmates, because we're going to talk about what X-Men characters we want to see next. If you support what I do, please click subscribe and hit the bell for notification so you don't miss a single video of mine when it comes out. Apocalypse is a character who is relatively new, believe it or not. He wasn't created back in the 60s like a lot of other X-Men villains were. He was created in the mid-80s for the comic book X Factor, featuring the original 5 X-Men. Naturally, a villain as high profile as Apocalypse has to get some toys sooner or later, and the very first action figure he ever got was in the first series of X-Men action figures made by Toy Biz. He was one of the initial 3 villains that was made. A couple of years later, Apocalypse got a second action figure from Toy Biz, and this one came with interchangeable arms that had various kind of weapons on them, like claws and a little drill it kind of looked like. It was neat. There were a few more Apocalypse action figures made around that time, but we're going to skip over those and go to the Series 7 Toy Biz Marvel Legends Apocalypse. This one was okay. He was kind of a weird looking Apocalypse who had very big thighs for some reason I can't figure out. And you could tell that Toy Biz wasn't really satisfied with it either, because they did another Apocalypse later on. But strangely enough, this one was a giant Build-A-Figure Apocalypse, who did look very cool. After that, we didn't really see Apocalypse for kind of a long time, but Hasbro did make an Apocalypse Build-A-Figure in 2018 that turned out pretty nice, and then they also did a deluxe version that was the Age of Apocalypse. That one was alright. It wasn't my favorite Apocalypse because it had some painted on details here and there that I didn't really think captured the character properly. But now we're getting another Apocalypse, and how does this stack up against Hasbro's other Apocalypse action figures? First, I want to say that this Apocalypse features some new stuff, but also it features some reuse. The legs are very obviously from the 2018 Build-A-Figure, and that's fine because those were pretty good legs to begin with. Aside from that, they're also taking his hands and upper arms from the 2018 Build-A-Figure, but the gauntlets are different. Those are new, and that surprised me. And I kind of like them. I like what they did here. The body on this one was a welcome change for me. I thought that all the work that they did here looked very nice, and I especially like that texture they put in the middle where his stomach is. That really works for me. One thing that does leave me a little disappointed here is that they didn't take the opportunity to give him a torso cut, because they already reworked this entire torso, and it would have been nice to have. But instead, we're getting the same old ab crunch and waist swivel, and while that's not awful, it's not as good as it could be. Another thing I really like on this one is the morphing hand accessory, where they give him a gun in place of one of his hands. I think it looks really nice. They did nice work on it, and it looks to be taken directly from a scene on the animated series. And speaking of the animated series, this is where we kind of have to start getting into some of the inaccuracies, because this action figure is very obviously based on X-Men the Animated Series. The colors match up pretty much perfectly, and a lot of the designs that we do see on this action figure match up too. Not all of them though, because, well, we're talking about the inaccuracies, obviously. He's supposed to be an animated style action figure, and yet he doesn't really match up with the rest of the 90s animated line because he doesn't have any of that cel shading on him. And I kind of wish that the other figures were just like him, because I'm looking at this Apocalypse, and even though I recognize there are things wrong about him, I do think he looks a lot nicer without the cel shading. Moving on to the inaccuracies, well, obviously the torso matches up with this Apocalypse action figure pretty much exactly. The torso's fine, but then we get down to the arms, and those upper arms have a little detail on them that is not present on the action figure. There's a little band that goes around his biceps that should be there. And then once we get down to his gauntlets, those are right. Those look like they do on the animated series, but then we look at his hands and he's got bands that aren't present on the action figure that are present in the cartoon. There should be a blue band wrapped around all of his knuckles. And then when we go down to Apocalypse's boots, if you look on the cartoon, Apocalypse has 2 rings stacked on each other on each boot. That's not present on the action figure. It's more of a high-tech type design. The design we see from the animated series is very reminiscent of Walt Simonson's artwork, and that should be reflected here. Fortunately, when we get up to the head, I don't see much that's out of the ordinary compared to the cartoon. He does have a cylinder on either side of his head where his ears would be, so that's something that's on the cartoon that again is not on the action figure. That's the only thing I see on his head that isn't right here. There's some smaller details on Apocalypse that we could nitpick, but honestly, the animation on X-Men the Animated Series had a tendency to be very inconsistent, so I think that the rest of it is fine as is. If those things were changed to what I mentioned, we would have a fairly accurate version of Apocalypse from X-Men the Animated Series. As it is, I do kind of like the look of this action figure, and frankly I think that the torso as it's presented here is much more appealing than what we've seen previously from Apocalypse action figures. Despite the inaccuracies that I found, I kind of like this one. Now, is it going to be worth the price tag that's going to be attached to it? I don't know about that. I'm not sure this is a day one purchase for me. But that said, I do enjoy it. It seems to come with a fair number of accessories, and the mishmash nature of the action figure and the colors presented on it, I do find quite appealing. I don't know why, but that purple and blue look has always kind of grabbed me. I have always liked it, even though a lot of people don't seem to care for it. Overall, I'm just really confused about the existence of this action figure when we have the 90s animated cel-shaded line. What is Hasbro doing here? Are they testing the waters to see people's reaction? Now that we've seen this Apocalypse action figure, what villain do we want to see next from an X-Men retro line? I want to see a new version of Magneto like he appeared on X-Men the Animated Series. I think that would be really tight. I don't think we've really gotten a definitive Magneto yet. And having one that's like an updated version with all the bells and whistles would be just awesome. I really want to see a new Magneto, and I hope they do it. Well, soulmates, what do you think of this Apocalypse action figure? Do you like this one, and do you want it for your collection? Are you a little bit confused about the existence of this action figure compared to the 90s animated retro line? I don't know, guys. Let me know down in the comments. I would love to hear from you. If you'd like to learn more about the last 90s animated X-Men action figure that was revealed, you can check out my morph video here.